Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about tape mediums. That's a confusing word. Specifically, I'm talking about electronic components that were stored on magnetic tapes. You want to think VHS cassettes where we held movies once upon a time. Compact cassettes where we used to keep audio before we had CDs and Spotify. And before fucking vinyl records made a goddamn comeback. That's a whole topic of heartburn with me. But they were also used for other things. Now, you had some professional grade tapes. Some came in cartridges, some did not. Reel-to-reel was used in audio production, as well as DAT, which was digital audio tape. I'm going to probably do a whole video on that because that is a fucking fascinating topic. I have never used DAT, but when I worked at the television station, we still had some of those old formats like DAT and Digibeta and some of those cool things that you've never seen before that I actually got to play with when I was a video editor at the TV station. So, fun stuff. But, you also have some lesser known uses for magnetic tapes. And one of those I'm going to talk about is data tapes, or data sets. These were used in a variety short-lived products because they were quickly surpassed with vastly superior methods as technology in the 70s, 80s, and 90s advanced so fast that we couldn't really keep up with it. Now, we've kind of sort of hit a plateau in recent years, but that's another video for another day. So, data sets, data tapes, are more or less some variation of a cassette, whether it's a VHS, or a Betamax, or a compact cassette. But instead of putting it in a recorder to put analog audio or analog video on it, you're putting it in a computer to store your digital video, well, not video, because that was impossible back then, but your digital files. These were used in things like your Atari computers and your Commodore computers and things of that sort. Now, digital data tapes were also used in another very obscure, lesser-known format in the video arcade. I do not remember the name of the company that did it. I think they were like Datasoft or something stupid like that. Don't quote me on this. It was something to that effect. What they did was, back in the early 80s up to the early 90s, video games in the arcade were stored on ROM chips, which are basically sticks of RAM that you just burn the software on, and then you just basically make it read-only instead of random access. So it's the exact same, technology that we used to make RAM chips, but they were ROM chips. It's confusing. But these ROM chips were also used in cartridges for video game consoles like the Ataris and the Nintendo and the Sega and stuff like that before we got to CD-ROM, and then fucking Nintendo pulled a vinyl and went back to cartridges because they're fucking weird. But, again, we're not bitching on Nintendo today. Well, we are, but not in this video. But you also had arcades that put their software on laser discs. These were very expensive and very rare and were only used for a handful of arcades. Nobody fucking played, and nobody fucking remembers. And there was another handful that put their programs, remember, video games are software programs, on data tapes instead of ROM chips. These were not cheaper than ROM chips, but they could hold a lot more data than a ROM chip. And they were interchangeable, so you could buy an arcade machine that had this cassette reader, and then it was kind of like the Neo Geo. You could just buy different cassettes and then just swap out the games. So they had sort of a value to the arcade. Minnie, get out of there! To the arcade owner, but they weren't really beneficial to the arcade manufacturer, and they weren't beneficial at all to the software developers because the software doesn't care if it's on a CD or a ROM chip or a cassette. It's doing the same thing. It's just zeros and ones feeding into a CPU. It doesn't fucking care what you're holding it on. But these arcade machines that use the data tapes were also very quickly eclipsed because, like I said, the cost of ROM chips came down quickly, and the size of ROM chips grew exponentially, so it quickly became just more economical to just shove all that data on bigger ROM chips. And then later, once we got into the 90s, they had hard drives, which, yes, they put hard drives inside arcade machines. I'm not going to give you a list of machines that use them. I'll give you two examples, Killer Instinct and Area 51. Those machines used a hard drive. And then you had CD-ROMs, which were very not ideal for arcades because they're noisy and kids are running around spilling Coke on everything and bumping into them. You don't want to bump a machine that's relying on a CD-ROM to read the data because you're going to lose the data. That's not smart. So CD-ROMs were very stupid for arcade applications. They were not useful for an arcade machine. But they did it anyways because, people are stupid and we do stupid things. But the other things that a lot of people don't know that tapes were used for was in medical purposes. Because hospitals have to store a lot of digital data, especially when you're talking CAT scans and you're talking, I can't remember what it's called, but the thing that shows you the baby in the belly. Digital imaging was primitive at the time, but it took up a lot of raw data, and you can't put that data on a CD-ROM because it was too expensive. You don't want to put that data on a floppy disk because it would take hundreds of floppy disks, and you can't really put it on hard drives because they were expensive, they weren't portable at the time, and they couldn't hold a lot of data, so they put them on a type of cassette tape that was interchangeable. So cassettes were used for a lot more than just VHS tapes and the compact cassette, which is more colloquially known as the audio cassette. But Philips, the company that made it, they called it the compact cassette. That's what it was officially branded as. That was the trademark, compact cassette. They licensed it out to other companies, Maxell and JVC and Sony and everybody else. Now, in the professional space, television stations got tapes, and radio stations and television and radio production companies, film studios, record studios, etc., were using tapes long before you and I were even a thing. They were using like reel-to-reel tapes or U-matic tapes and things of that sort. There were hundreds, not exaggerating, hundreds of incompatible formats that everybody was trying out. So one of the reasons why preserving television programs from this time, broadcasts from this time period, radio broadcasts from this time period, musical recordings and such, is very difficult because these tapes, sometimes they were recorded on a machine that doesn't exist anymore and no one can find the parts for it or compatible software. So it's very hard to transfer a recording from something that you can't access the data. Now, starting in the 80s, record studios and television studios, movie studios, Hollywood studios, etc., went through a process of digital remastering all of their catalogs. Now, digital remastering is basically taking an analog copy, whether it's the film itself or a videotape recording of it or a scan or whatever, and basically recording it or encoding it in a digital file on a hard drive somewhere, and then using that as the new master copy that would be used to create new copies as new technology would come along. Video CD, and then DVD, and then Blu-ray, etc., etc., Netflix streaming, and so on and so forth. The same thing was done with audio. So anytime you go to Spotify or Apple Music and it says remastered, it could mean one of two things. In the old days, digitally remastered just meant that they took the original tape, whatever it was recorded on, and they just digitized it in the highest format they could. A raw, uncompressed PCM audio file or a WAV file, at the highest kilobit bit rate, at the highest sample rate that they could. And then they would use that to make new cassettes and record new vinyl records and make CDs off of and send to radio stations in their various formats so that they could shoot it over the airwaves so you could hear it on your Walkman. This was when we transitioned from analog to digital. But in doing so, we lost a lot of media. The stuff that was saved on tape. Now, some of these formats, VHS, compact cassette, Betamax to an extent, Digibeta, 8mm, High 8, some of these are fairly well preserved because they were very popular. They had mass market applications. And so it is still fairly easy to access these products. Now, reel-to-reel and U-matic and, some of the, like ED Beta or VHS HQ, these are hard, or Super VHS, these are harder to access because if you bought a Super VHS VCR for your television station or production and you bought VHS cassettes and you saved everything in the Super VHS format, you're going to have a hard time finding compatible players that can play back the Super VHS signal. Now, it'll still play back the standard VHS signal, but you don't want that. That's useless. So anything that was recorded to Super VHS, for all intents and practical purposes, is essentially lost. Because nobody has a Super VHS player. And by the way, a VCR with an S-video cable is not a Super VHS player. S in the SVHS and the S and the S-video are not the same goddamn thing. S in SVHS means Super VHS. It's a high-resolution video cassette format. It is not compatible with VHS. It is not compatible with S-video cable. It requires its own video cable. It either used the coax cable or tangent, I know, or it used the composite cable, the yellow, red, and white. S in S-video stands for separated because it separates the luminance from the chrominance signal, meaning the light signal from the color signal. That's it. That is all S-video does. I gotta go on that rant every once in a while, because if I search Super VHS players on eBay, I get a bunch of fucking standard fucking VHS VCRs that come with an S-video cable, and it's like, no, that's not the same goddamn thing, you fucking idiots. Anyways,